Good evening and welcome to VPM's special coverage of the 2024 election. I'm Angie Miles and we are here with you on air and online throughout the evening, monitoring the returns and talking about the important issues in today's races. Sitting next to me is VPM's Rich Marr, amicable host of our podcast, RVA's Got Issues. Rich is also our resident political analyst. So Rich, those polls have been closed for almost an hour. And now we just have to wait patiently, right? So easy. Just wait patiently for the results.
Sure. Election anxiety is real. The struggle is real. And I feel bad for folks sitting at home, right? Because there's this just endless parade of numbers on the screen. It's hard to know what to make of them. I mean, I think there's a couple of ways that this race could go. One way is that we've had some suggestive data that maybe we're undercounting Democratic votes, that maybe there were some late shifts thanks to Trump's Madison Square Garden rally that was very divisive and might have scared minority voters back into the Democratic column. But we've also seen some evidence that maybe we're undercounting the Republican vote instead, right? Trump has generally outperformed the polls in his last two presidential races. And so it's a little hard to see which data points are heading in the right direction, right? It's possible that we could see over the rest of the evening some Democratic overperforming in battleground states, or we could see Trump overperforming, right? Some Republican overperforming. If we see something heading in that direction, right? Districts that we thought were, and states and races that we thought were going to be one way and they look like they're another, that might help us get a little bit more of a sense of the direction the race is going. On the other hand, there's that middle road, right, where we just have every race is different. It's an incredibly tight race that's just a few votes either way, in which case we could be in for a very long election week.
Yeah. You said week.
Yes.
That's the word people didn't want to hear.
For
week.
sure.
But we do know it could take a while. And as you pointed out, I mean, former President Trump has so far outperformed polling in his two previous outings. Democrats, not so much. They tend to underperform. But then there are people who say there could be secret votes. There could be people who are not really saying who they're voting for one way or another.
Exactly. And so, again, the polling is supposed to give us a guide of what's going to happen. But really, in recent years, it's just been really difficult to guess who's going to vote, who's going to turn out, and how they're going to vote.
And this is the only poll that counts, Election Day. We will continue to have more coverage for you. Go to vpm.org for all of the races, all of the issues, and we will continue to be here with you on YouTube. Stay with us. You're watching VPM News, and this is our special election coverage. I'm Angie Miles. Virginians are waiting to find out who their next congressional representatives will be. And we are taking a look at the congressional returns as we have them. And so far, they're not shedding very much light because we have so few of the numbers reported so far. And that's expected, of course, at this stage in the game. So as you can see, if you are looking at your screen there, we have just 24% estimated reporting in the Senate race. And with 24% in, it's showing Tim Kaine up 56 roughly to about 44% for Republican challenger Hung Cao. And we can, not tell very much so far with less than a fourth of the vote counted, Rich, but I think maybe Tim Kaine is favored to win, but you never know.
You never know, right? But it wouldn't be a big surprise here, and those numbers aren't surprising. I would expect them to kind of keep coming in at that race, at those kinds of percentages, maybe going up, maybe going down a little bit. I mean, Tim Kaine, America's dad, he was on Saturday Night Live this weekend joking about how he's been forgotten. But here in Virginia, he's very much remembered and very popular. And in fact, Hung Cao, who is, let's say, a colorful candidate running a colorful campaign with some interesting imagery and some interesting things to say, even about rural voters who might have preferred him. I think saying that, podunk counties that he didn't need to go to. It really was the case here, I think, that Hung Cao was the candidate in the race because other stronger candidates for the Republican Party realized how hard it would be to beat Tim Kaine. Again, we'll see. We're counting all the votes, but it's not a surprise there that Kaine is having the big numbers early on. He's likely to be the winner in that race.
And we're going to keep watching. As expected, we're also watching this congressional contest. Some have garnered more attention than others. 3 districts that have interested observers not only in Virginia, but far beyond the Commonwealth are the 2nd District, the 7th District, and the 10th District. If there's a common theme in Virginia's most watched congressional races, it may be this. Military service is on the resume of all 4 major party candidates in Virginia's 2nd and 7th districts. The 7th has 2 accomplished Army veterans vying for the seat being vacated by Democrat Abigail Spanberger. Republican Derek Anderson and Democrat Eugene Vindman both have ties to the former Trump White House. Anderson, a Green Beret who became a lawyer, is a Spotsylvania native, touting the economy and border security as his top issues. If Vindman looks familiar, it may be because he and his twin brother Alexander were involved as whistleblowers in the first Trump impeachment. A former White House civil rights attorney, Vindman's family emigrated from Ukraine when he was a child, and today he is embracing the Democratic platform, prominently reproductive rights. The 7th was solidly Republican for decades until Spanberger won the seat in 2018. Now, as she tees up a swing for the governorship, it remains to be seen if the area will stay blue or return to its red roots. Virginia's 2nd District is home to tens of thousands of veterans and active duty service members. The district took on some political notoriety in 2022 when 2-term incumbent Elaine Luria lost her seat after redistricting. In the 2nd, 2 former naval officers are vying for the congressional seat currently held by Republican Jen Kiggans. The former state senator and geriatric nurse practitioner says she's focused on security, including economic and immigration security, as well as serving veterans and strengthening America's standing on the world stage.
You really need to know how to compromise, how to work with others. I think it's worth noting that I was recently named number 19 most bipartisan member of Congress out of 435, which I think is a big feat and a great honor for a freshman member of Congress.
Kiggans' challenger, Democrat Missy Cotter Smazel, is a former business owner who considers her opponent inflexible on what Smazel says matters most, protecting reproductive rights for women, including service members. Smazel notes that by leaving abortion and reproductive laws to the states, military personnel are at the mercy of wherever they are assigned rather than where they might personally choose to live. She says the rights need to be codified into national law.
Women, all people, are entitled to bodily autonomy. I will make sure that we secure that bodily autonomy, and then I will get to work delivering results, making sure that we are trying to improve job opportunities, improve our local economy, fully fund our schools, and support our seniors.
To the far northwest of the Northern Neck and Greater Hampton Roads, you'll find the Washington, D.C. suburbs of the 10th District. Similar debates are in play here, with Republican Mike Clancy saying the abortion issue is appropriately a state-level issue, and Democrat Suha Subramaniam vying to pass a national law protecting reproductive rights. A lawyer with expertise in technology, Clancy is a regular commentator in the national media. He calls warnings about Project 2025 a distraction put forth by Democrats.
They can't run on the economy, and they can't run on the border, right? They can't run on global security. My campaign is a mission to restore America, and that's focused on the economy, it's focused on border security, it's focused on education.
Subramaniam is also a lawyer and a state senator who has been a small businessman and a volunteer emergency responder.
The last 2 leaders in this district were women who really cared about reproductive freedom and really wanted to make sure, regardless of even your religious affiliation, that women have some form of bodily autonomy and access to health care. They also want to make sure we protect our democracy, and Trump is an existential threat to democracy today. I think that's what a lot of people in our community are feeling, and a lot of people like them, Democrats and Republicans, are feeling too.
And when I spoke with Suhas Subramanian, he said that there's a lot on the line, and that's a refrain that we've heard from the candidates, from friends, from family, from our neighbors throughout this election season. We would like to take a look now at some of the returns that we are starting to see from those congressional races. Of course, it's hard to tell how things are going to go until we get more of the precincts reporting in, but with 9% in the 2nd District, we are showing Jen Kiggans up 56% to Missy Cotter Smazel's 40%, Robert Reed, independent, at just under 3% in the 2nd District. And that district, of course, Rich, was a big mix-up, toss-up, point of contention over the last couple of years, with Elaine Luria losing the district after redistricting.
Right, and Jen Kiggans defeating her. And I think the Democrats nationally were really targeting this race early on in the election cycle. I think more and more this is seen as Jen Kiggans' race to lose. She's run a good campaign, which has really just involved not getting in her own way. As an incumbent, right, incumbents have all the advantages in our democracy. And so she really just needed to make sure that she didn't really commit any large mistakes, really put herself on the national radar, and has seemed to accomplish that. Now, it's always possible that if, again, we're underestimating Democratic turnout, that Missy Cotter Smazel, her opponent, her Democratic opponent, might be able to eke out a win here. If Missy Cotter Smazel does win in this district, that would be a good sign for Democrats all across the country, like a very good sign. But I'd say most likely outcome is that Jen Kiggans holds on to her seat.
Okay, another one people are watching, the 7th District of Virginia, where Eugene Vindman is taking on Derek Anderson. Derek being a native of Spotsylvania, Gene Vindman coming from Ukraine, growing up here, but being in the spotlight during the first impeachment of President Trump. And he is with 34% in the reporting in so far, up 57% to 43% in the House. In the election in District number 7 is what I'm trying to say. And we also have some numbers from District 10. Suhas Subramanian up 53% to Mike Clancy's 46%, with a pretty substantial amount reporting in, 78% of the vote in Loudoun County. And Loudoun is considered a purple place. I mean, they could go either way. Lots of federal workers there, lots of people watching to see whose issues, whose platform is more aligned with what they want at that moment.
I think that's right. I do think that the 10th District has broke a little bit more into the Democratic direction over the last month or two. And again, I think the national parties are seeing that maybe as a race that's gotten away from the Republicans and into Democratic hands. It's really more the 7th District, right, with Gene Vindman and Derek Anderson, again, centrally located. It was redistricted. It used to be closer here to Richmond, where we are, but it kind of moved up north a little bit. But it's still this mix of suburbs and rural areas and federal workers and commuters, but also people living on like farmland and in small towns. And I do think that that is the race that people are really, really looking at to see, again, a sort of bellwether race about what direction the country is going in this race. That race there with these two, it's an open seat, and much more so even in the 10th District, which really overlaps quite a bit more with Northern Virginia suburbs where much more dense and much more democratic. That 7th District is really where I think the entire eyes of the country are looking, not only on who's going to win and what it tells us about the turnout, but control of the House of Representatives is at stake here. And Democrats see that as a race they absolutely have to win.
And that's key, the control of Congress at issue here. I think, I've been asked if this race or this election season can boil down to a word. I would say it's trust. And the 7th is a good example of how there's conflict there. There's been this dust up about Derek Anderson having posed with some family members who weren't his family members, but were friends' family members, and they said there was never any, deceit or misleading intended. And then you have Anderson charging that Vindman has maybe exaggerated or even falsified some of his military record as well. And so trust, who do you trust? Who's telling the truth and who's being honest with us is something.
Yeah, for sure. It's a key issue in the race, and it sort of mirrors the national race, right? About which leader you trust, the Harris-Walz leadership or Trump Vance to lead the country forward for the problems that we're facing.
Yeah. Well, we are looking at several localities that have important issues and races for voters to decide. In the city of Richmond, the mayoral race is one of those. There are 5 candidates who've been working for months to earn votes in a contest that is run a little differently than most. Here is the backstory of how Richmond came to choose its mayor so differently than most other places. Richmond's method for electing a mayor is unusual, even unique. And the explanation of how it came to be includes the White House and the United States Supreme Court. Here's a map of the city's current districts, 9 of them. West End, North Central, North Side, Southwest, Central, Gateway, East End, South Side, and South Central. In order to become mayor, a candidate must win the majority vote in at least 5 of these 9. This district system has been in place since the 1970s, following a Supreme Court ruling meant to protect black voting power in the former capital of the Confederacy. The signing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 is considered a crowning achievement of the civil rights movement. In 1970, as the South continued grappling with issues related to racial equality, Richmond moved to annex 23 acres of land from adjoining Chesterfield County. This would expand the city's footprint, but significantly, it would add 47,000 residents, and the vast majority of these new Richmonders would be white. Before annexation, 52% of the city's voters were black. After annexation, only 42%. A black activist, Curtis Holt, sued to stop the annexation on the grounds that this was racially motivated voter suppression. The case went to the Supreme Court, which ultimately declined to stop the annexation. But the court recognized how black voting strength could be undermined if leaders were elected by popular vote from the city at large. Beginning in 1948, Richmond's mayor had been selected from within its mostly white city council. But in 1977, with these new districts, the city saw its first black majority council and chose its first black mayor, Henry L. Marsh III. It would be more than 20 years after Henry Marsh's historic selection as mayor when the city would revise its charter to allow Richmonders to elect the mayor directly. The successful candidate was required to campaign widely throughout the city in order to win at least 5 of the 9 voting districts. And 5 out of 9 districts. Maybe no one gets there this evening, Rich. What do you think we do if that doesn't work out?
Right. So as we noted here, it's sort of 2 different ways of looking at the race, right? You have to get 5 of the 9 districts to win the mayor's race outright. But if you don't, then it does go back to an overall vote count. We want to know who are the top 2 vote getters across the city, and those folks move to a runoff that would be in the middle of December at a time when people are not going to really be interested in hearing about elections. So what really would matter there is which of these candidates are able to get their voters back out to the polls 6 weeks later when there is no presidential election, when everyone doesn't want to hear about politics anymore. Do they have the money? Do they have the resources? Do they have the supporters to get their voters to the polls in December to win the mayor's race then? That would be very interesting, be unprecedented in our history. We've never had a runoff here.
It is interesting, though, the way that this works out in 2024, with some folks saying they think that this system is really not needed anymore, that we could have just a citywide election for mayor and there would be, proportional representation among different races and so forth. And we have more Latino people, more Asian residents in the city now. So I've heard people talk about maybe a ranked choice election. What do you think the odds are for that?
I think odds are good. I think there's a lot of interest in revision. There was a charter reform commission put together in the last year or two that suggested we look at changing the mayor election. I just think that caution is the word here, right? And based on the history that we just showed, right, we cannot just rush into a post-racial future and say, well, we don't have to worry about that in Richmond anymore, because in Richmond we should know this more than anywhere else, right? The past has its legs that continue on into the present and to the future.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is it for us for the moment. You can continue to follow all of our election coverage on vpm.org. We've got you covered on multiple platforms. Rich and I will continue our conversation and our visual coverage on YouTube at VPM throughout the evening. We'll see you back soon.